Good afternoon, everybody. Oh, come on, you do better than that. Good afternoon, everybody. You heard the American accent, right? We're supposed to be the rah-rah people, right? But I'm married to a Japanese who keeps my Americanness in control. However, I married a very intelligent woman. So she uses the best of both cultures against me. So I never win at home, so I try to win in business, okay? So today we're going to talk about being the leader you'd want to be. And we're going to talk about some key principles around that and some key ideas, especially if you're the right leader you need to be, you're going to get the most out of your people, you're going to use their creativity, and that's what creates a real competitive advantage. So let me share with you one thing. When I was leading, I found out that this equation kind of made my leadership. My leadership success and the quality of my personal life was in direct proportion to my people owning what I'm asking them to achieve. Not what I'm asking them to do, but what I'm asking them to achieve. In other words, I had a bigger bonus and more dinners at home. In fact, that's the way my wife equates success. More money to spend and home more often. Okay? And I found that you really need to lead in a way to get people to really feel the ownership. Okay? Because when people feel an ownership, they try and solve problems on their own before going and asking their boss. It's extremely important. So what I like to do today is I like to use an acronym, and I like to use the word OWN. And I like to talk about three things. I like to talk about outcomes. I like to talk about why. And I'd like to also talk about another acronym called NIFO. Nose in, fingers out. Okay? It's a style of leadership that way. And I want to start with a story. I started my career installing enterprise systems around the world. So I worked at a big major corporation. I went into a subsidiary. We would lead a team, train everybody up on all the new system. We'd flip a switch on a Friday. Monday morning, everybody's doing something different. We change every single process at once. And I did that 4 times. I did it in Egypt, I did it in the Netherlands, I did it in Italy, and I did it in Japan. So I did it across all those cultures. And think about it. 6 weeks later, me and my team were gone, and they got support from another country. They needed to know what they were doing. They needed to own their work and own their job. And then later in my career, I led organizations, Europe, Africa, Middle East organizations. Think about this. When you lead people at a distance, can you see what they are doing? In another country, another city, you can't. You can't manage activity. You have to lead for achievement. In another country, can you tell people exactly what to do? Does business get done the same in Portugal, in US, in Germany, in Japan? No. So you can't actually tell people directly what to do. I lived in Italy for a year. I managed Italy from a distance. I still don't know how they do it sometimes. Basically I'm saying, did you achieve that? You're not in jail? Hey, that's great. No, it's just joking now. But seriously, I wanted them really to own the achievement, okay? Now, let me tell you a story. I did all those implementations by the age of 32. And then I heard a story which helped me to be a better leader the rest of my career. Do you remember when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait? Remember the first Gulf War, and there was a coalition between US, UK, and they were flying sorties round the clock, bombing everywhere. And then the ground war was like a day or two or something like that. There was a general who took over the U.S. Air Command, Tactical Air Command, 2 years before this war. They could not have flown so many sorties because they weren't very good at repairing airplanes. They were very slow. In fact, they were organized by functions. So all the avionics and software in one group, mechanical engineering another group, weapons another group, etc. And they had sophisticated systems telling each person where to go to repair an airplane. So one day they repair here, one day they repair, one day they repair here. The general said, this is crazy. He threw away the computer systems. He put in the teams, all the disciplines needed to repair an airplane, supply, engineering, avionics, and said, here's your 20 planes, keep them flying. Create another team. Here's your 20 planes, keep them flying. Created teams all around the world. He ran competition across the teams. But if you create competition, you have to do one other thing. He forced the teams to share best practices. If they did something good, they couldn't hold on to it. They had to share it with everybody. They increased flying time 3 times. They were repairing much, much quicker. So the general went around all the different places that made the change, and he always asked one question. He said, how do you like this new way of working? And one team member asked the question back to the general. He said, when's the last time you washed a rental car? That was the question back to the general. Have you ever washed a rental car? Anybody? Nobody puts their hands up. Why don't you wash a rental car? Because it's not yours, right? When I do this sometimes, I have someone yell out and say, I don't even wash my own car. Give me a break. Why would I wash a rental car? But what the team member was saying was this. He wasn't focused on the plane flying. Before, he was focused just on their activities. Now they're focused on the plane flying, which is the outcome. I found very successful leaders speak in the language of achievement, which is the outcomes, not the activities. Think about it. When there was 4 problems before and 3 were fixed, 3 of them felt great. They did their job, but the plane is not flying. Now when there's 4 problems and 3 are fixed, they're trying to help each other because success is not a completed activity. Success is an achieved outcome. Here's what I found with very successful leaders. They will focus and they speak in the language of progress and achievement, which is outcomes. When you speak in the language of activities, it's the language of busyness. Okay? Think about this too. If you delegate an activity for someone to do, who owns the outcome that that activity supports? You do, not them. They only own the activity. So I found that you really need to think and discuss and get people to own the outcome. This general I told you about, he was going beyond the word outcomes, beyond the word ownership. The goal for his organization was the word pride. He wanted his people proud of what they were doing and achieving. Think about this. Are your people more proud completing an activity, or are they more proud achieving an outcome? If you're going to drive pride in an organization, you want to frame the outcomes to the size of the people, and they'll use their own creativity. But here's another reason why you have to be outcome focused. Think about it. If we don't have a clear outcome, we'll just do what we've been doing every day. But inherently, we're all lazy. So if we have a clear outcome, we'll try to find the shortest way there. So if you want creativity from your people and to use that as a competitive advantage, you have to get them thinking about how they're going to achieve that outcome faster. So I found you unleash creativity with people with a clear outcome and also some type of constraint, right? Think about it. If you have unlimited time or money, do you have to be creative? It's when you have some type of constraint that makes you much more creative as well. So I found that you need to lead by outcomes. But have you ever heard this guru, his name, Peter Drucker? Have you ever heard that? Peter Drucker said an interesting thing one time. He said management is about having the right answer. Leadership is about having the right question. You think about this in terms of leadership. When you ask your people how are they going to achieve the outcome, you ask them for the milestones, they reveal to you the leader you need to be because you can see if you can trust them. If you trust them, you let go a little more. If you don't trust them, you have to manage them tighter because you're still responsible for the achievement. So I found it's the questions we ask that reveal us the leader we need to be to get the best from our people. If you're just asking your people about the activity they completed, you don't learn anything. You learn if they did the activity or not. You ask them how they're going to achieve the outcome. You learn if you can trust them. But now here's an even more important question. Which level of leadership would allow you to have less emails in your inbox? Leading by milestones and outcomes or leading by activities? Okay? I sometimes do a session called, What Does Your Inbox and Schedule Say About You? I can look at each of your inboxes and your schedule and I can tell what type of leader you are. Because I can tell where you're having the majority of your conversations, about progress or just activities. You know, I do a lot. Over the years, in about 6 or 7 countries, I've done CEO mentoring groups. So one time, you get a bunch of CEOs, maybe 15 to 20, and they help each other run their business, and they get a speaker like me in. One time, the speaker said to me during the break, he said, look at my inbox. He said, I'll get you the coffee and a croissant. Look at my inbox. See how I am. He was actually pretty good, but he had one other problem. He had too many CCs. Be careful, because CCs are like a responsibility distributor, right? I don't want it all by myself, so I'm going to CC and distribute it everywhere else. So I found the real key of leadership is getting people to feel ownership for the outcome. The more you get them to feel that ownership, the better. Now, the one last thing on this one, think about this. You see outcome versus activity every single day in business. Have you ever heard this expression? We need a meeting to discuss something. Have you ever heard that expression? I get the funniest smiles when I hear that. Is discussion an activity or an outcome? It's an activity. That's why your meetings aren't very good sometimes, because you frame the meeting in the activity of the meeting. You don't frame it in the outcome of the meeting. In leadership, I found meetings only have 3 outcomes. You need an agreed decision, you need an agreed action, or you need alignment. Because meetings are about progress. If you can make progress without a meeting, you don't need the meeting. Okay? So I found that it's interesting here. Let's do a quick one. This session I'm having with you, is it an activity or an outcome? It's an activity, right? Yeah, and most people will say it's an activity with the hope of an outcome, right? Yeah. So, you know, the thing about this, one thing I found working, I've done thousands of sessions, small and big. One thing I found with very successful people, some take lots of notes, some take no notes. But the most successful people only search for 2 things. Do I need to change my mindset, my thinking, or do I need to change a habit, something I do every day? So when you think about that, when you hear some ideas today, always think, do I need to change my mindset, or do I need to change a habit? Because what I found with very successful people is that they do not like to be disciplined. So they're disciplined enough to create a habit. They say, would I rather be disciplined a lifetime, or would I only rather be disciplined 30 to 45 days? And they do that equation in their head. So it's really amazing. So think about this. You've got to be thinking in outcomes all the time, and you have to lead your people in outcomes. If you're managing activities, that's micromanagement. Think about this. Micromanagement comes with a speed limit. Because when you micromanage people, you operate to the speed that you can keep everything straight and tell them what to do. So you're not using their brains, you're only using yours. And when you're micromanaging, it's sort of like this. You're like an individual contributor with more arms and legs. Because you're not using their head, you're only using effort from them to do things. Okay? I hope I convinced you on this outcome focus. Because everything I do, I'm thinking, what is the outcome? And if I'm not going fast enough, I make that outcome clearer, so I find a shorter, faster way there. Okay? So keep in mind outcome focus. And keep in mind, whenever you attend any type of training, always search for 2 things. Do I need to change my thinking, my mindset, or do I need to change a habit? Okay? So that's the O of the own. The W is why. Here's the equation I found of success for yourself, including success for leaders. Why has to be greater than how. Think about it. Whenever you had something really difficult to do, you didn't know why you needed to do it, you procrastinate. You put it off. Okay? Picture the person who wants to quit smoking. They want to quit smoking. The why and the how are battling each other. They quit, they go back, they quit, they go back. Then they go to the doctor, and the doctor says, you have a spot on your lung. Now the why is here, and they quit like that. They say the leaders are the why people. Best definition I ever heard, I heard this many years ago from a consultant. He said, the people who only know how will always be led by the people who know why. The people who only know how will always be led by the people who know why. So your power as a leader is not giving them the answer, the how. Your power is defining a why, a what, and a why, which really energizes them that way. So it's why greater than how. You know, there's an acronym, CEO. They say you can change the E from Chief Executive Officer to Chief Explaining Officer. Their job is to explain the why. They have a whole army below who can do the what and the how and so forth. There was a very successful entrepreneur said this. He said, my job is to tell stories and give examples of the company we want to be and the impact we want to make in the marketplace and to our customers. And it's my people's job to figure out how we're going to do that. So he gave a very clear target and with why. Why is like the emotional fuel. You know, you ever hear a lot of discussion around having a company why? And everybody says we have to have a company why that rally about. Company why is important, but a why above a company why is only powerful if people personalize it. What does it mean to me? So I always had an organization or a company why, but I never started with that as a motivator. I start with the personal motivator, and then I link it back up to the company motivator. Because motivation is personal. I cannot be motivated by your passion. I'm motivated by what? My passion, and vice versa. So think about that. But why has to be greater than how. Whenever my people weren't taking action, it meant that the why wasn't strong enough. Okay? Now here's a quick question for you. Two types of people in the world. Some people focus on enjoyable activities, which is the EA. Some people focus on enjoyable results. Which is the more successful? By a show of hands, how many people think enjoyable activities, the people who focus there, are more successful? A few hands. How many think enjoyable results? Many more hands. How many don't know? How many don't really care anyway? Okay? Now, think about this. You need to enjoy 80 or 90% of what you do, or you'll never want to be great at it. I've never seen someone be great at something they didn't enjoy. Okay? However, the world doesn't pay you for what you enjoy, right? The world pays you for results and value. Okay, the value delivered. What I found, 95% of my leadership headaches came from something in the middle. Because something in the middle is called the non-enjoyable. Do you enjoy 100% of what you have to do to be successful in your job? No, neither do your people. So you're here this afternoon. If your key people are avoiding a non-enjoyable, you just lost a half day's productivity. Okay? So non-enjoyable, motivation. Do you have to motivate people to do what they enjoy? No, you have to motivate them to do what they don't enjoy. So either you have two powers as a leader. You have want-to power and have-to power. Either they want to do it, the motivation's there, or you make the results visible that they have to do it. I come from the corporate world. You know, what do you think corporate managers rely on more? Want-to power or have-to power? Have to. They'll have all these metrics for everything. You know, I love it when I go into companies, I'll ask them from their KPIs. And I know a company is in trouble if their KPIs have a page 2. Because then they're not very key, are they? It's just a laundry list of everything. Okay? So keep in mind, you know, you got to get people to do the non-enjoyable. So the motivation, because when you're not around to tell them, it's not getting done. Now, do successful people, do they do the non-enjoyable at the beginning of the day, or do they do the non-enjoyable at the end of the day? Beginning, right? You know, the unsuccessful do it at the end of the day, and they go, you know, I'm really tired now. I'll do it tomorrow morning. And then they repeat the cycle, and 2 weeks later, nothing's done. I'll tell you, the biggest headaches I ever had is people avoiding the non-enjoyable. And if you're not around there to push them, they just won't do it. Okay? But here's your biggest non-enjoyable problem as a leader. Your biggest problem of a non-enjoyable is you are avoiding a difficult conversation. When you avoid a difficult conversation, there's some clarity your team is leading or something else. But let me ask you this question. If you avoid a difficult conversation, is it like good Portuguese wine? It gets better and easier with time? Or is it more difficult? Yeah, the longer you avoid that difficult conversation, the fewer options you have. Okay? What difficult conversations are you sitting on right now? Now, let me ask you another question, because this is very important. If you're avoiding difficult conversations and your people see you avoid them, do they look at you as a very strong leader or a weak leader? Which do they follow more strongly, a strong leader or a weak leader? Yeah. And I'll tell you, there's one phrase I never heard from any single leader anywhere. I fired that person too soon. I've never heard that either. But think about this. What difficult conversation are you sitting on? Because that's the biggest non-enjoyable for leaders. If they see you addressing those, and it's usually conversations with your peers. Right? It's usually peers. If you think about this, you get a tip. Your power in any company is not how well you lead your team. It's not how well you manage your boss. It's how well you influence your peers. Okay, I used to teach at the IE Business School in Madrid, and I actually mentored and coached for 8 years, 4 years informally, 4 years formally, global executive MBA students. Okay, these are people average age 35, very, very successful. The number one habit, the number one skill of the most successful MBAers is they had the ability to influence their peers. Peers meaning inside the company, out to customers or vendors. Okay, so keep that in mind. That's often your non-enjoyable, but that's what creates your authority and power and leverage across the companies. Okay? So that's the W. So remember, you need a why powerful enough that they're going to do the non-enjoyable without being told. The last one is N for NIFO. Nose in, fingers out. Your nose is in. You're not surprised by something you should have known. But what happens if your fingers are in all the time? Your people expect your fingers to be in what? The next time. You're going to give them the answer. Think about this. Every time you give your people an answer, you save them from thinking. If you save them from thinking, you save them from growing. So if they're not growing, 1 year from now, their ability is the same as today. So the biggest thing I found in leadership is you need to grow your people's business judgment. Because if you can never let go of the decision, who has to always be there? You. Okay? So if you think about nose in is really about what? Questions. You have to ask more questions. They put your nose in, they hear what's happening. But here's an interesting one for you. Two people are having a conversation. One person asks all the questions. The other person gives all the answers. Who controls the conversation? The questions, right? Questions. So if you're just answering your people's questions all day, that means they're in control of every conversation with you. Does that sound good? Not really. There's only one group who control the conversation through the answer. That's politicians. Because politicians are not answering the question. They're just stating whatever. The question is like noise. You know, it's like noise. Right? So think about this. You have to ask better questions. The biggest preparation you can do as a leader is your quality of your questions. But here's what I found too. You know, when I was leading, I had a habit of always, whenever I went to any location, I had a habit of asking, who are your best people? And I'd always take them for a beer, or take them to lunch, or take them to dinner, because I wanted to learn from the best. And I took a top salesperson out one time in one of the countries. And he said, all my success came down to one phrase. If the customer's talking, I'm winning. Think about that. In influence, if you get the other person talking, they'll influence themselves. It's when you're talking all the time that you're not really influencing them. And who is everybody's favorite subject? Themselves. Right? So if they're talking about themselves, they're going to be feeling great. They're going to be feeling great. So your power is never the answer. Your power is the question, getting people to think, getting people to feel more that way. And in fact, think about this too. You're only ever clear on something in your head based on two things. You either have to say it or you have to write it. Because when we think by ourselves, we think in fragments. We never have to put the fragments together until we have to say it or write it. By asking questions of your people, you're forcing them to complete the thought. That is huge. Because they'll sell themselves. Just like if you're selling a product, you get them talking, they'll sell themselves. But the other thing here is interesting. There's a way to give the answer without giving it. The best leaders do not tell people, they use stories and examples to tell. There's something psychologically that when we hear a story or an example, we don't feel that we've been directly told. We get the idea, but we don't feel that we've been directly told. Also, think about this. Which is more memorable? Lots of data or a story and example? Yeah, you remember it all the time. Okay? So stories and examples are an experience. What's your memory? It's an experience. So if I use a story or an example, your experience links right away. You use lots of information, they have to convert it to retrieve it to their own memory. I was doing a session about 18 months ago in Norway, and I asked them, I said, how would today be if I never told you a single story and never gave you a single example? and the person said, it wouldn't have been relevant. He said, because every time you use a story or an example, my brain was going to my own experience. Okay? When I ask that question in the universities, I get a different answer sometimes. I always get a smart ass who would say, it would have been shorter. But stories or examples are they're like an emotion carrier. They carry the emotion of that way. So when I tell you a story or an example, you're not only getting the emotion of me saying it, but I'm grabbing the emotion of your own experience and making it highly relevant. So the power in leadership is doing NIFO. Nose in, fingers out. Keep that in mind. At the end of each week, ask yourself, did I live NIFO? Was I surprised by something I should have known? Am I having to keep giving the answer to someone because they're not taking that ownership? That's really, really important. Okay? So keep in mind own. Outcomes, why, and NIFO. That acronym, it's very powerful. Now, I want to share with you before I finish something interesting. Let me ask you this question. Once you know what you want to achieve, you know why you want to achieve it, and you know by when you want to achieve it, as a leader, what's your next thought? Someone said, well, how? The most successful leaders do not think how. They think who. Think about it. If you think how by yourself, you're limited by your own knowledge and experience. So your solution will be limited. You ever go to a CEO's office? You know, some issue, they call this person in, call this person in. They want as many brains on the issue right away. But also CEOs don't want to take it, so their desk is slanted back at the people. So nothing comes to them. It's always going to be someone else's. Think about this. If you take the how, and you think about the how, and you take it far along, and then you give it to your people, do they think it's theirs, or do they think it's yours? Yours. The last thing, to think about this. The faster you get a who involved, the faster you can get rid of it. Okay? The faster you can delegate it. Now, this came from one of my boss, from a person, a boss that I was coaching. This executive of a Europe, Africa, Middle Eastern fund management firm, he sends me an email and he says, I figured out my job. He had a huge problem. His first instinct was to call his best person in and tell them what to do. But he heard Mark Fritz in his ear. So he called his best person in. He said, could you think of 2 or 3 options and come back tomorrow morning and let's discuss? His person came back with some similar options, but even some better ideas. He went and fixed it. So he said to me, the subject line of his email was, and he said, this is what I consider my job. My how is who. So in essence, as a leader, your how is who. Okay? You should be thinking who before how. Here's a very important phrase. One of my friends said it sounded more like a Dr. Seuss. You know Dr. Seuss? Phrase. Think about this. If you don't have a who is the who? You. If you don't have a who, the who is always you. So think about this. The more you empower a who, the more success you're going to have and more dinners at home. Okay? It's extremely important. But one thing you always need to do, if you attend anything or you're doing anything, you've got to have reflection. The most successful leaders reflect. The best definition of reflection I ever heard is this. Reflection is the opportunity to give yourself advice. So if you're never reflecting and you're running 100 miles an hour, you're never improving. You have to take the time to reflect because it's the opportunity to give yourself advice. So I'd like you to do is take 30 seconds to a minute, and just reflect on what I covered. Is there anything you could do different? Okay? I'm just going to give you 30 seconds to a minute. Think about it and write down. Make a commitment. Is there anything you can do different based on what I covered? Okay? So 30 seconds to a minute now. Has anybody picked up anything they can action? That wasn't a full minute. You know us Americans, we always push the issue. You know, we always go, have to go faster, have to go faster. Okay. So what I like this to end with is remember, nose in, fingers out. Thank you very much.